In the small hours of September the 1st, 1939, German troops crossed the border into Poland. 2 days later, as Warsaw experienced another day of continuous bombing, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain finally declared war on Nazi Germany. The war began disastrously for the Allies. Poland quickly fell, shortly followed by the capitulation of the Low Countries, and by May 1940, the Nazi panzer divisions were moving through France at a rate of 40 miles in a single day. Adolf Hitler was almost in sight of his greatest goal, the stubborn little island of Great Britain. Facing the prospect of invasion by the Nazi conquerors of Europe, the morale of the British people was desperately low. The House of Commons responded by voting to bring down Neville Chamberlain's Conservative government. And from the midst of much political manoeuvring, Winston Churchill emerged as head of a coalition war cabinet and the country's new leader. On the evening of May the 14th, 1940, after one of the bleakest days of the war, and long before most people had any notion of who the members of their new government were, a momentous intervention was made into the lives of the British people. The Secretary for War and Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, announced over the radio the formation of a local defence force, a volunteer organisation for the shielding of the country against imminent invasion. It would be called the Local Defence Volunteers, and the government tentatively requested 150,000 civilians to step forward. But within 24 hours, over 250,000 people had signed up. Before the end of June, the LDV had nearly 1.5 million members, and by the end of July, its name had been changed to the more familiar Home Guard. This is the story of that ragtag collection of volunteers, young and old, from all walks of life, who rallied together for the defence of their country. This is the story of the People's Army, the true story of the Home Guard.
Squad! Attention! Stand at 8.
Local police stations acted as recruitment offices as the tide of public opinion swept volunteers in their thousands to do their bit for the defence of the country. No medical exam was required, and the upper age limit of 65 was limply enforced, which helped give the organisation something of a reputation as a dad's army. Volunteers were supposed to be vetted, just in case the LDV turned out to be the answer to the fifth columnist's prayers. But in reality, if you wanted to join up, you would have had little difficulty in doing so.
Well, the first hardest thing, I think, was walking into the police station and lying to the police sergeant that I was 17.
As long as you were capable of moving under your own power, sort of thing. There was no medical. And I think one of the things was you hadn't got to be colourblind. Just a simple test to make sure you weren't colourblind, that's what I remember. But as long as you were 17 to 70 sort of thing.
Some of the old boys were really a bit ancient, but we managed.
Soon, village greens and city parks became busy with the sights and sounds of drill routine as the new recruits were taken through their paces. The imagination of the people had certainly been captured. Employer and employee stood to attention side by side, while farmer and farmhand, poacher and gamekeeper marched together. Cavalry units were formed in the Western Hills, river patrols on the main waterways. A Marines outfit operated upon Lake Windermere.
All out!
The Prime Minister has told us that there are in Britain 500,000 local defence volunteers. And here is one section training on a London rooftop. Hotels, factories, business houses have started their own units of defence against the menace of invasion. In the days when attack has a habit of coming from all directions at once, these volunteers may well prove to be of the utmost value.
I worked as a milk roundsman, which then was 7 days a week, so I didn't have any time off. So I worked during the day and then did the drills whenever. You had a certain number of drills you had to do, I can't remember how many, but we had drill nights during the week and most weekends.
Many Home Guard battalions grew up in the workplace, the larger factories often running them as their own private armies. Southern Railways set a precedent for public utility companies when it organised its own Home Guard unit. The Post Office, Fleet Street and the BBC soon followed suit, establishing their own forces. The Palace of Westminster unit proudly boasted the membership of 95 MPs and 17 peers.
Here's a factory somewhere in Essex where the day's work is just starting. It's like 1,000 others, where the man on the gate greets the managing director.
Good morning, sir.
But in the evening, the man on the gate comes into his own.
Company! Quiet!
Not only does he drill the lads who work at the benches and in the offices, but he also has the managing director in the squad.
Keep your arm parallel with the elbow into the side, the fingers round the butt of the rifle to the bottom, and your thumb round the toe of the butt of the rifle. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Well, we're ready and have been standing by since the Munich failure. As chairman of the Machine Gun Corps Old Comrades Association and an old contemptible, I ask that we all be mobilized at once. We are fit. I'm a pretty fair example of the material myself. We were known as the Suicide Corps. We are prepared to form suicide squads, officers and all ranks together. The whole nation should be mobilized for action. Keep your hearts up. We know how to fight with our backs to the wall.
Keith Chisman belonged to his local platoon known as KT-10 that covered the Sittingbourne and Milton Regis area of Kent.
Each area had a number. Like Faversham was KT9, Maidstone was KT11, Chatham and Gillingham was KT12, and so on. I think. And then there was the GPO was KT25, because they guarded their own telephone exchanges. The Maidstone and District Bus Company was sort of a mobile unit, and they were KT26. KT27 was the KEP, which was the Kent Electric Power Company, and they guarded electrical installations. And KT28 was the Southern Railway.
A great number of London transport staff, eventually numbering some 30,000 from the underground, the buses and tramways, were organised into platoons all over the capital. Mr. J. Graham Bruce admitted to no military experience whatsoever when he volunteered for the Northfields unit in West London. I took my turn in guard duty one night in every 8 days, he remembers. Afterwards, I went home on my bicycle, complete with Lee Enfield rifle, haversack, gas mask and water bottle. If I fell off for any reason, I had to find a lamppost to remount. We had some weekend training exercises. These included visits to the Bisley firing ranges, learning to handle live mortar bombs and to look after other equipment, such as Lewis and Bren guns.
You might think that bus drivers and conductors who work through the Blitz are doing quite a bit for victory. But a lot of them are doing even more. Hundreds of them are in the Home Guard, and a very smart and efficient band they look too. The biggest unpaid army in the world is now a real force in the defense of Britain. Bus drivers and conductors are normally quite pleasant fellows, but I think they'd be a bit rude to Jerry.
Volunteers will be provided with uniforms and will be armed, Eden had added in his appeal to the nation. That would be generally true about a year hence, but by the end of July 1940, when Churchill changed the name of the LDV to the Home Guard, the volunteers were far from well equipped. Kent was considered an area particularly vulnerable to Nazi invasion, but only 1 in 10 Home Guard members there had a rifle, and they were far better equipped than volunteers elsewhere. Of course, after the evacuation of Dunkirk, with much of the British Expeditionary Force's equipment abandoned on the beaches of northern France, the army were given priority. Improvisation was the name of the game. Picks, crowbars, truncheons and homemade spears were brought into use. Many of the recruits in rural areas already had firearms, and elsewhere, rifles kept as souvenirs from the Crimean War made an appearance. Even dummy rifles were proudly brandished on parade grounds.
You read about it, of course, and you saw photographs of them training with broomsticks and whatnot, but by the time I went in, they were fully equipped.
I was given a .303 rifle and 50 rounds of ammunition in a bandolier. You used to wear it like a Mexican bandit, across so. and I used to keep that at home in the wardrobe.
Our area, being in a vulnerable area, the rifles were dished out, not for every man, but you know, one between 5 or something for a start. And by the end of July 1940, of course, the American stuff was coming over.
American aid for Britain doesn't forget the Home Guard. Hundreds of thousands of rifles and revolvers as well as ammunition have arrived in Britain, and more are on the way. They are the gift of the American Committee for the Defence of British Homes.
The War Office issued its first instructions to the fledgling volunteer force. It claimed, "The volunteers are neither trained nor equipped to offer strong, prolonged resistance to highly trained German troops, and they will therefore best fulfill their role by observation, by the rapid transmission of information, and by confining the enemy's activities. They will also act as guards at places of tactical or industrial importance."
You'd have a drills, parading and drill, learning about different weapons, and then of course we had our guard duties to do, which I used to do on the water pumping station at the Snodhurst Bottom.
The main thing was guarding the waterworks, which was known as a VP, a vulnerable point. But the water was essential for survival, obviously, and for firefighting.
My particular outfit used to do a guard, used to mount a guard on the Welling North Railway tunnels. It's place along here where the main line goes, where it goes over. You've heard of Welling Viaduct, have you? The big viaduct. Well, we used to do that too. We used to patrol that thing. We used to have to walk across that at 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark, and the parapet about 18 inches high. I used to walk between the lines. I wouldn't go near the edge, not on any effect. They'd get 100-foot drop as well.
Another thing that seems amusing now is they had a cyclo patrol, and I didn't have a bike, and so they put me in a big basket, like a delivery errand boy's bike, and I was sitting in front of this basket with a Sting gun, you know. Seems ludicrous now, and rather vulnerable if we'd been ambushed by enemy airborne forces or something.
Now here's an example of street fighting. The Home Guard is called on for a counterattack to relieve a hard-pressed platoon.
I don't think we can get this down, but DR, the road's completely impossible. I'm going to send it down by one of Lee's skating boys.
And so the skating section goes into action, and that means action. When the Home Guard get skates on, they do things Sonia Heaney never dreamt of.
With the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk, the prospect of defending Great Britain against a Nazi invasion was becoming a very real one for the growing number of Home Guard volunteers. From the humiliation of defeat in France, the British claimed a great victory at Dunkirk. But the reality was that her people now faced Hitler alone.
The orders were that if parachutes or airborne forces were seen landing in the vicinity, local church bell would be rung. And there was a false alarm on that score. My grandparents one night heard a bell tolling, and they got up and wondered what on earth was going to happen. Well, nothing did happen. And they heard it on another occasion, and they saw next door but one neighbours get on their bike and go off in the Home Guard. And they saw them next day and said, oh, it's a false alarm of some sort. So the headquarters contacted all the vicars of the churches all in the area, and they assured them that no church bell had been rung. And then a rumour got circulating that the Germans were coming over, cutting off their aircraft engines and gliding and ringing a bell to cause havoc and confusion. Anyway, the truth eventually came out. Out in the estuary was a navigation buoy with a bell on it. And when the wind was a certain direction, it would rock this buoy and ring the bell, and the sound carried inland. And so the Trinity House authorities had to muffle this bell and issue a notice to mariners to the effect that it would be muffled for the duration of hostilities.
With Hitler on its doorstep, the whole nation was roused into improving the country's defences. To prevent potential glider landings, all open spaces became littered with improvised hazards. Farm carts, broken down cars, bedsteads, and even old kitchen ranges were used. Fields, recreation grounds, golf courses, sports pitches all underwent transformation. So much so that a German radio programme reacting to received intelligence reports announced that a revolt against plutocratic cricketers had occurred in England. Signposts and street names were removed, roadblocks set up. Members of the Home Guard were empowered to demand identity cards from motorists, and many a courting couple was harassed in this way. Even policemen were not immune. Many were continually stopped and challenged at gunpoint to produce their identification. Tank traps were laid across many roads, intended to hinder invader traffic.
There was a lot of humour about it, a lot of unfair humour, because to start with, yes, they didn't have any guns. There weren't any guns to issue them with, and some of them did get a bit officious, because they would be the ones who would mount the checks, the road checks, and they could be a bit officious. You know, somebody would drive along that they knew perfectly well who it was, but if that person hadn't got a pass, they wouldn't let them into the village, you see. But they're the isolated incidents.
Our unit used to guard the railway bridges in the area, the actual bridges, and they used to put roadblocks under the bridges, and they were bent sections of railway line that fitted in sockets in the road, anti-tank obstacles. And I remember they were lined with wood, the reason being they discovered that railway line is comparatively brittle, and a charging tank could shear them off. But as it was in a wooden socket, there was a certain amount of give in it, and it wouldn't shear it off.
We thought maybe that there was parachutists that were going to be our particular problem, and preparations they made for, in case armoured vehicles came along, tanks or something like this. We had a beer crate with what looked like half-pint beer bottles in it. What they were was half-pint bottles filled with phosphorus. And if you had a tank, shall we say, and you could get that bottle on their tracks, you know, where the support rollers are, that would stick and burn, and it would burn the rubber guides on the tank tracks and disable them. Well, you've got to get near enough to chuck them at him, you see. But
Meanwhile, Hitler's invasion fleets began to form in the Channel ports of France, and Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's plan for the conquest of Britain, was drawn up. Sea Lion depended upon the total destruction of the Royal Air Force, however. Without mastery of the skies over southern England, Hitler's invasion fleets would be able to do nothing. As a result, for 2 months, the RAF were goaded almost daily into costly battles with the Luftwaffe. During the Battle of Britain, Home Guard volunteers were ever vigilant. They were on the lookout for invaders in whatever form they came. One of the great myths of the war was that German troops would parachute in disguised as nuns. The author and leading women's rights spokesperson Virginia Woolf lived near the Sussex coast and found herself being warned to expect clergymen in parachutes. Genuine bailed-out airmen, whether of the Luftwaffe or the Royal Air Force, could come under speculative fire from over-eager recruits. Crash-landed airmen of both sides were certain to first be approached by Home Guard patrolmen. Luftwaffe pilots would be proudly arrested, while the pilots of the RAF would be taken off to enjoy the local hospitality. Guards would patiently watch over the plane wrecks to prevent pillaging.
A German bomber over a district in South London was brought down by the rifle fire of the Home Guard.
I remember the first morning the German aircraft came over. My father peeked through the Venetian blinds and he said, "If that lot of German, heaven help us." He'd hardly said it and the guns on Chittney Marsh opened fire, you know.
In one of the woods, my brother and I, we had as boys do, we had a little den. And where we'd been scrumping apples, we would keep a few apples in that den, you see, and we would go up there and say we're going to have a little picnic. And one day we got there and all the apples had gone, and we were most annoyed about this. And then we suddenly saw this man standing in the trees somewhere. We looked a bit closer, and he was only a young man, and his clothes were all torn and covered in blood, and so, you know, we didn't like the look of him at all. And so we went back to the village, and we told them about this, and they didn't believe us. And anyway, we said there's definitely a man up there, and we think he's a German. And anyway, eventually the Home Guard went, and it was a German airman, and he bailed out and landed in those woods. And he'd been there 3 days. He was badly wounded. He'd been there 3 days. He could see the farmhouse just across the fields, and he could see the village. But he'd been told that if he gave himself up, any Germans who gave themselves up, they would immediately be shot by the villagers. And he was scared to give himself up. And all he'd had to eat in those 3 days were our apples.
The only Germans who actually landed were bailed-out aircrew. I never actually encountered any, but one morning I remember seeing 7 parachutes in the sky at one time. Of course, I think some of these German bombers carried a crew of 4, so perhaps, you know, it could have been 2 bomber crews and a fighter pilot or something. Of course, some of the parachutes were our own people coming down. And there were, not in our area, but there were instances of trigger-happy people firing at our own parachutes coming down.
A proud and distinguished moment came for the members of the 3rd Renfrewshire Home Guard Battalion when they were on hand to capture Hitler's right-hand man, Rudolf Hess, when he inexplicably landed his Messerschmitt fighter in Scotland.
Meinem Hut. Meinem Hut.
Organisation of the Home Guard battalions progressed in a somewhat haphazard fashion. Operational control was given to the Commander-in-Chief Home Forces, General Ironside. He was given the task of producing a chain of command, but in reality, improvisation from the bottom quickly outstripped organisation from the top.
Hands up, Fritz.
The Home Guard was not intended to have officers and NCOs in the usual sense. All members were supposed to be privates, but inevitably, some were more private than others and appointed to lead at various levels. Many of the retired army officers assigned to command battalions were mockingly regarded as blimps, and as a result, prominent members of the local community were just as likely to be asked to lead their comrades.
With a large proportion of the members of the Home Guard were First War veterans, and they owed them one from last time, you know. And they were real professionals. Some of them had done 20-odd years service in the regulars out in India and such places. We had a permanent staff instructor who must have done about 30 years, and I was only the boy sort of thing. But there was other young chaps as well. And a lot of agricultural workers who were reserved occupation, you see, because they were producing food. But there were people like schoolmasters who were reserved occupation were often officers and that sort of thing.
The commanding officers were businessmen, really, people, shop owners and builders and that. And the platoon members were just, came from all walks of life, really. Butchers, bakers, milkmen.
You know, like Dad's army now, I was a stupid boy, you know. I got the company runner's job. You know.
The natural development of the Home Guard's command structure into something resembling the regular armies raised doubts as to whether it qualified as an irregular force under the Geneva Convention. Hitler swiftly made this question irrelevant, however, when he denounced the Home Guard as a bunch of murderers and terrorists, declaring that its members should be shot if captured. As might be expected, the volunteers rather enjoyed being taken seriously in this way by their celebrated nemesis. In August 1940, Home Guard units were affiliated to the county regiments and promised regimental badges, and by February of the next year, army ranks were being formally introduced.
Philosophers have argued whether the pen is mightier than the sword. But here we have both. And I wish to compliment you upon the public spirit which has enabled you, by continuous sacrifices of leisure, continuous attention to the routine of drill and training, to produce a military unit.
And so the parade marched past. You remember the old days of the LDV when the only weapons they had was an armlet and a penknife. They look different today. They make you realize that all the growing pains of the Home Guard have really been worthwhile. So the Home Guard's got its first band. Talk about full equipment. Having a full-size band is just like the army and very ceremonial. It won't be long now before somebody comes on parade with a goat. So now, in addition to training, there's band practice. That means that for another night in the week, the little woman will be all alone. Still, perhaps it's worth it. There's more oomph in a kiss when they come home from blowing a trumpet.
The Battle of Britain still raged over the skies of southern England, but the RAF was for the first time beginning to gain the upper hand. Seeing his chances of invasion slipping away as winter approached, Hitler turned his attention to the bombing of Britain's cities. On the 7th of September, a dense swarm of German aircraft blackened the London skyline. Nearly 1,000 planes, a third of them bombers, covering an area 2 miles high and 800 miles square, sent Londoners scurrying for their air raid shelters. The bombs fell and London was ablaze. The Great Raid on London of September the 7th, 1940 was the beginning of a long nightmare for the British people. In that first raid alone, 430 people were killed and over 1,600 badly injured. Vast areas of London's East End were reduced to rubble. Thousands left homeless. In the blitzed cities, the Home Guard acted as a valuable addition to the civil defence services. All recruits were trained in basic rescue work and incident control.
The things you never forget, aeroplanes coming down, German bombers flying over. I saw a Dornier going over it on fire about, 200 feet up and crashed into houses over in Rochester. People, injured. My brother was blown through a glass window with a blast from a bomb.
I never for one moment even gave a thought to the fact that something could happen to my parents. To me, they were invincible. Nothing would happen, and nothing did. They survived the Blitz. The old house was very badly damaged. All the windows blown in and ceilings down and everything else. But they lived there all through the war. My father was in the Home Guard, and he took that very, very seriously. He'd been a soldier in the First World War, and they survived the Blitz okay.
A lady was going to bed one night and saw a cigarette glowing in a garden shed. So she reported it, and the Home Guard patrol went to investigate it on the possibility it might be a bailed out German airman sheltering in there. So they crept round there, snatched the door open, covered it with a Sting gun, and there was a harmless old tramp in there, but it could have been a German.
Also on September the 7th, the day of that first great raid on London, the code word Cromwell was issued by Home Forces head offices. The signal meant invasion was imminent. From the Outer Hebrides to the Isle of Wight, members of the Home Guard stood at their invasion posts. In many villages, church bells were rung in the belief that the attack had already begun. In fact, it was a false alarm, and the likelihood of invasion as winter drew near was quickly receding. Fatefully, Hitler was now turning his attention eastwards towards the Soviet Union. On May the 20th, 1941, the Home Guard celebrated its first anniversary with a parade at Buckingham Palace.
The Home Guard has been greatly honoured by being allotted the duty of mounting guard at Buckingham Palace. This great privilege accorded to the 1st County of London Westminster Battalion is shared in spirit by the whole of the greatest volunteer army the world has ever known. His Majesty himself turned out to watch the ceremony when the spare time men took over from the Scots Guards. The Home Guard has just celebrated its first birthday, over 1.5 million strong and always growing. And here you see a steadiness and precision that bear comparison with the Guards Brigade. If that invasion comes, it looks as though it'll be Hitler's birthday.
On sentry go in the night. If it's wet, the water trickles down. You need to where it tickles, and the raindrops ooze through your socks and shoes. If you're feeling on the black side with the wind around your ear, oh, then you get those Home Guard blues. I've got the Home Guard blues. I've got the Home Guard blues. On sentry go in the night, when the sergeant's wife of beauty said, now you must do your duty.
As the threat of invasion subsided, the role of the Home Guard began to change. Until now, it had provided invaluable support to the regular army by assuming the responsibility for watching over the 5,000 miles of British coastline, by manning roadblocks, and by guarding strategically important buildings and aerodromes. But now, it was becoming increasingly seen as a training ground for future recruits into the army. The government was particularly keen that boys of 17 and 18 receive a good grounding in military life before their inevitable call-up.
Nothing like a war for breaking down tradition. And that's how it is we find the DB News cameras on the floor of the Stock Exchange. The first time that well-guarded interior has ever been filmed. The Stock Exchange Cadet Corps is on parade, carrying on the voluntary work it has been doing for the past 14 years. Guards instructors give the best possible course to boys before they come of age for the military call-up. And they also give a refresher course to middle-aged men who are members of LDV units. Under the stern eye of the little major in command, they go through the hoop. But when they come out, they really do know something about drill and musketry and even the Bren gun.
So the main thing I learnt was to change step, I think. And of course how to handle a rifle and a Sting gun, which was useful when I went in the army. At least I didn't have the embarrassment of not being able to change step.
Well, we just trained the same as I suppose a soldier would. Things that stick in your mind was when we went up to Fort Darling for grenade throwing, and they gave you a Mills bomb. You pulled the pin out, and it's very frightening when you feel the bomb jumping in your hand. You've got a pound and a half of explosive in your hand. So you throw the bomb, and I threw mine, duck your head, and the next thing I know, I had a ping as a piece of shrapnel hit my tin helmet.
These are just a few samples of the defense tactics of Britain against the promised invasion. Number one, the defense of a railway station. It might be any station. The great point is that any station will have its defenders, either from the army or the Home Guard or both.
Much of the basic training of volunteers, beyond that of simply being taught the niceties of drill routine, was firstly instigated on a freelance basis. A number of schools were set up by private initiative, the most famous of which being Osterley Park in Middlesex, that was run by Spanish Civil War veteran Tom Wintringham. Many, on the left of British politics, saw in the Home Guard the makings of a people's militia. Socialists such as Wintringham and the novelist George Orwell, who was a member of a Home Guard platoon in Primrose Hill, London, believed that in order to defeat the might of fascist Germany, the people of Britain not only needed better weapons, but also a conviction that victory would bring about true democracy and a people's peace.
Here is a device designed to improve the marksmanship of every man who hopes someday to have a shot at a Jerry. The Swift training rifle has the kick in the butt just like a service rifle, and the arrow points pierce the target exactly where you aim them. It is magnificent training for Home Guards. Besides improving your accuracy, it's good fun. The target is composed of the figures of men drawn to scale as they would appear at the appropriate ranges. We don't know yet whether we're likely to be invaded, but if every man in the British Isles can shoot straight, it'll be easy meat. Bisley training is invaluable, but not everyone can get to open-air ranges, and they also use ammunition. This training rifle can be used in any small room.
Because we used to do exercises with the army. I mean, we did a battle course in the chalk pits at Waldham. It's quite terrifying when they're firing a machine gun at you on fixed lines, and you're watching bullets spurt up in front of your nose. And then you'd have to run. We'd run through this chalk pit with explosions all around, you know, machine guns firing. And then the funny thing about it was we got to the end of the run, and some of these old boys, they were trying to climb the cliff as well. They didn't have to do that. In fact, it was dangerous because in that particular exercise, one of the regular soldiers had his leg blown off with a grenade.
They couldn't spare blank ammunition, and you know, you must have a few bangs, otherwise it doesn't sound effective. You know, you can't stand up and say, "Bang, I've got you," can you? You've got to point your gun at someone and make a bang. Well, you know the sort of thing that goes in a Christmas cracker, the thing that, you know, you pull it goes crack. You imagine that 3 or 4 times the size. Well, they used to tie bundles of these with string, and you tied it to the muzzle of your rifle, and a long string to the trigger guard. And when you pulled the string, you pulled one of these crackers. Well, hell of a bang. You know, it sounded quite good. But it was a bit comical, charging across the field, pulling the trick, bang, bang. And they issued us with a thunder flash, which was a giant firework. It was probably, I don't know, inch and a half in diameter, very nearly, inch and a quarter maybe. And about, the body of the thing was 9 inches long with about a finger's length of fuse pipe. And the idea was you struck the end on a matchbox and it fired, and then you got a little while to get rid of it. That was a grenade, and that made a very satisfying bang.
And it was a bit rough at times when you were hand-to-hand combat with regular soldiers, but it was quite good. And then we used to do exercises with tear gas bombs, you know. They used to catch anybody who wasn't carrying their gas mask. Any civilians, they used to know it then.
Camouflage has left its mark on the Home Guard. This is how they're working these days. Many units are adopting guerrilla tactics in their schools of intensified training. The art of concealment by merging with the landscape is illustrated in these pictures of Home Guardsmen exercising at an Army Fieldcraft Center. If brick buildings were the background instead of bushes, they'd turn into the local. It's really amazing how close you can be to a body of men without knowing it. The disappearing trick has been brought to a fine art. A last-minute panoramic view of some of the men who stayed as trees for a while to face the cameramen. Incidentally, all dogs had been warned off the course.
More evidence of the Home Guard's changing role came when in 1942 many volunteers were recruited to serve in the anti-aircraft batteries, thereby releasing regulars for the front lines in Europe. By September 1944, the AA batteries had incorporated as many as 140,000 Home Guard members. Ronald Quarrington found himself to be one of them.
Very frightening, that is. When you stand on the side of those projectors and fire, and you see the flames creeping around the side at the back. And when they first fired them, they had some flagstones at the back as a plate, and they sailed in the air all off. So it was a bit dodgy.
The government was concerned that the diminishing threat of invasion would begin to undermine the morale of Home Guard units as its volunteers began to question the purpose and necessity of their duties. One way in which to bolster this morale was believed to be the issuing of new and better weapons. And indeed, the provision of arms to the Home Guard was beginning to take an upturn. By the winter of 1940-41, most of the Home Guard were wearing battle dress and came armed with a wide variety of weapons. American P-17 and Canadian Ross rifles, American Browning automatic rifles, old Lewis guns, the standard Lee Enfields, and even some Thompson submachine guns of the type used by Chicago gangsters.
Well, we had a Ross rifle, which was Canadian origin, and it was a bit unusual. It had a straight bolt action, if you get what I mean. You pulled it straight backwards and forwards, whereas the Lee Enfield, you lifted it and turned it. That was the main difference. But the basics of any rifle and the aiming are much the same. Once you know one, you can easily adapt to any rifle. Another thing we had was a Sten gun, which was an automatic 9mm weapon.
I had a Ross Canadian rifle, as I said, 50 rounds of ammunition. Then late afterwards, they got issued with Thompson submachine guns. Then of course they brought out the Sten gun later on, but I never saw those.
We did go on the range and we did fire the various weapons at targets, and we sighted our weapons to suit a particular gun, and we fired. At least I personally fired the 303, a Lewis, a Bren, threw a couple of grenades. They did all the business.
This is First World War Smelly, which is a short magazine Lee Enfield. Holds a 10-round magazine and it's bolt action. The Germans mistook them for machine guns. Each man had a machine gun because they were fast and accurate.
Here we have the Mark II Sten. The Mark II was a very good weapon as far as close quarter combat was concerned. Regularly issued to Home Guard units of a frontline nature. However, they were very, very concerning as far as use was concerned. In fact, more people were killed on our own side by these discharging accidentally than the enemy were actually killed. You didn't even need to have your finger on the trigger on more than one occasion. Excellent weapon, but very, very worrying for the user.
This is a P17, which is an American manufactured rifle but to a British design. These were supplied in vast numbers to the Home Guard as part of the American lease lend program. Same principle as any bolt action rifle. When the bolt is pushed forward, it feeds each round in individually, and then when you pull it back, it ejects them afterwards.
This is one of the training schools in Britain where Home Guard officers and NCOs are learning to use the latest weapons, the Browning automatic rifle and the Tommy gun, and various kinds of bombs. Here's the well-known Mills grenade. Next is a percussion bomb which causes a lot of dissatisfaction when it goes off in a crowd of Nazis. This is the new sticky bomb. These are the first pictures to be released of these two bombs. Thrown at a tank, the sticky bomb stays put while it goes off.
There was also an enthusiastic wave of eccentric inventions, simple ideas that could be mass-produced in order to meet the demands of the 1,682,303 volunteers that were registered as at the end of September 1940. There was the flame trap and the flame fugazi, designed as static ambush weapons, the Woolworth and sticky bombs, the black bombard or spigot mortar, and the Northover projector.
In the 12th Battalion, they had a Northover projector, and the bottle of phosphorus was standing on top of the stove, and somebody knocked it off. And they had a hell of a job to put the fire out, because nothing could put it out.
And of course, one of the most widely produced weapons was the old reliable Molotov cocktail, the official version of which was known as the No. 76 self-igniting phosphorus grenade. These innovations met with varying degrees of success and popularity, but there was one weapon that turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. The Prime Minister Winston Churchill personally championed the issue of 250,000 pikes, which were essentially surplus bayonet swords welded to long metal rods. Although only seen as a temporary measure while battalions awaited the arrival of rifle shipments, the pikes were universally ridiculed and condemned. Home Guarders were angry at being asked to meet the sophisticated military might of the German army with what could only be regarded as medieval weaponry. As the war progressed and the fear of invasion was replaced by anticipation of the Normandy landings, the public's enthusiasm for its volunteer defence force failed to waver. Numbers never fell below 1 million, and as everyone prepared for victory in Europe, the members of the Home Guard diligently went about their appointed duties.
Nothing gives an indication of how Britain has got into its stride for war better than the progress made by the Home Guard in 3 years. From a large, untrained and unwieldy mass of enthusiastic amateurs has grown the biggest regiment in the world, fit to fight anyone and smart enough to guard Buckingham Palace. The honour of guarding the royal palaces is not offered without good cause. That this offer is conferred upon the Home Guard is a tribute to the hard work and devotion of the largest and least expensive part-time army ever raised.
However, the government became so confident that the threat of invasion had passed, it decided the time was now right to disband the Home Guard. The Lord Mayor of London gave a dinner at Mansion House to mark the standing down on December the 2nd, 1944. And the next day, 7,000 volunteers marched through London, cheering crowds, acknowledging a job well done. 6 months after the Home Guard was disbanded, the war in Europe was over. And for those who survived, the celebrations could now begin.
Stand to!